Is it me, or is California trying to see how shitty they can make their state? First, you had Elon Musk pulled his factory out of California, moved it over to Texas, took his jobs with him. Then California thinks it's an amazing job to try to basically attack the gig workers, so that because they need the money in terms of payroll taxes, right? So if you're a gig worker, you're basically independent. You basically have to file for your own taxes. And so you basically become like a little mini boss of yourself, and you get to do your own taxes. And at the end, you decide how much you have to pay the government in terms of your taxes. Well, of course, California didn't like that. So under the guise of, these workers need health care, sick days, etc., they tried to make it so that Uber and Lyft drivers were no longer considered, in essence, gig workers, but they wanted to put them basically on the payroll. And of course, that would raise cost, right? Because if the company has to pay for sick time, personal leave, and of course, for basically benefits for medical, etc., well, then that costs money, right? That costs the company money. And they straightforwardly said, well, we'd have to pass that on to basically the customer. And so basically Lyft and Uber have abandoned California, and basically California lost another 200,000 jobs as a result of course, trying to tax the wealthy, or just basically trying to tax the little people, because of course they are hurting for tax revenues. They run their state very poorly. I think even during Schwarzenegger's time was like, this company's bankrupt. Like, what's going on here? So he tried to do his best. But of course, Governor Newsom says here, signs bill allowing male inmates who identify as women to be housed in women's prisons in California. And of course, this happened previously with a lot of like the ICE sort of holding areas where people would be caught illegally. And so women and children who were basically fleeing, looking for amnesty, were granted amnesty. And so, but it was typically only given towards women and children. And so a lot of the Mexican men coming across the border simply just identified themselves as women. And of course, they were basically skirting the law, allowing them to come into the country illegally. And of course, this is, of course, another foolish law being added in, just like the recent one where Governor Newsom is trying to eradicate all, gas-powered vehicles after 2035, saying no more vehicles that operate basically with gasoline will be allowed to be sold within the country. And it's like, but you do realize that the amount of cars that are basically electric run basically very few of them. The other thing is California typically has problems, especially with wildfires and during the summertime, managing their electricity. So if you're throwing more onto the grid, well, then won't that screw over a lot of people who use basically battery powered cars? I don't know. But new law being proposed, I should say, a new law he signed in, is where California now allows men to opt in to women's prisons, removed protections protecting minors from sexual predators, and of course, has opened the door to funding medical transition for minors. Now, people might say, well, there are certain individuals that this would benefit, right? Even in the hospital setting, we typically don't pair like patients who identify as transgendered typically with other patients. Typically try to separate them and put them into other rooms, because obviously if you put them in a room with a woman who's born, it usually creates problems, especially if that person is a little bit older. The person is probably like a little bit older. Most of the time it will create an issue and you'll have to move that person anyway. Same thing if you put that person and you pair that person up with a man, there may be an issue. So typically we just separate them. And of course, instead of doing that in California, because of course they're targeted by the other male inmates, they're used typically as sexual objects. I mean, there's a lot of rape that goes on, especially within male prisons. But to just go and show you what is the more than likely outcome that will happen to more than likely outcome that will happen to the genetically born females who are basically being housed with basically men who were, individuals who were born as men who then identify as women or who have transitioned, right? So looking over at The Guardian not too long ago posted a piece talking about transgender prisoner who sexually assaulted inmates jailed for life. It says Karen White, 52, admittedly sexually assaulting women in female prisons and raping 2 other women outside of jail, right? It says Karen, 52, described being as a danger to women and children, admitted sexually assaulting women in a female prison and raping 2 other women outside of jail, right? So previously, in a generation long gone, we typically identified such individuals having probably some sort of mental disorder, right? So it was one that was very known, and of course, science and the medical community tried to do what they could to basically reintroduce these individuals back in society so that they could function within the society that they lived in. That has since changed, and of course, now we basically encourage these individuals to live out their lives according as they see fit. Of course, under the reasoning that these individuals are born this way. Again, some individuals are born more angry than others. Some individuals are born liking little kids. But we agree that those individuals should not act out just because they were born this way. In effect, we try to do everything that we can to try to limit the inevitable outcome of what would happen if we were to allow these individuals to just basically run amok in society, right? Pedophilia is a big thing. People typically die related to individuals who cannot control their anger. So we tell people you need to learn to control your anger. We do everything that we can, of course, to support these individuals. So unfortunately, what will more than likely happen in California with this passing of the law is typically what we see here. It says White was transferred to Newhall Prison in Wakefield, West Yorkshire, on remand last September after being arrested on suspicion of repeatedly stabbing a neighbor. So you have an individual who has a history of sexual assault, who of course raped 2 individuals, who of course now has added to their repertoire of stabbing the neighbor, right? So this individual is out on the street instead of being monitored and watched by local authorities, by the medical community, so that they don't pose a threat to those who they come in contact with. Individuals are allowed to roam freely. It says the attack on fellow prisoners took place between September and October, right? So there's a period of time where this individual was basically acting out in a poor way that, of course, that was affecting their fellow inmates and, of course, neighbor. This 52-year-old who is currently transitioning was sentenced yesterday for 2 counts of rape, 2 sexual assaults, and 1 offense of wounding, while White has previous convictions for indecent assault, indecent exposure, gross indecency involving children, and animal cruelty, and of course, dishonesty. I didn't know that was against the law, but maybe that's a character reference. It says the Ministry of Justice has apologized for moving her to the women's prison, saying her previous offending history had not been taken into account. And my question is, whether you believe in God or you believe in evolution, we all have a brain that is able to, of course, think and ponder upon facts, able to see how these facts will come into a play, basically look forward to see what could the possible outcome be. And that's where wisdom comes into play, and understanding, having an understanding of this person's history. Perhaps this individual may be best separated from the community. We obviously understand that they need to be separated from the local community outside of the jail, but more than likely they also needed to be separated from the community that exists inside the jail. So I don't understand how these individuals, and of course they apologize. We apologize that you got stabbed. We apologize that you were raped and molested and sexually assaulted. My bad. Can you imagine saying that? Can you imagine saying that as a politician? Like, why did you put this person into general population with everyone else with that history? And then, the warden or the attorney general or your mayor or whoever it is that's responsible for, of course, all these laws being like, my bad, bro. We'll try to do better next time. I swear, California on the way to being next level Mad Max.